So there was a fantastic article from my friends at Gaping Void, the culture consulting group. And the article was called, Why Does Mattering Matter? And as they discuss in the article, there's a big difference between belonging and mattering. Right? They say in the article, belonging just means you fit in culturally. Mattering means you are essential to the team's success. Now, we'll put a link in the details of this episode of this article, because I imagine when you hear that quote, belonging just means you fit in culturally, mattering means you're essential to the team's success. When you hear that quote, many of you, your mind goes to where my mind goes to, playing time and roles. Playing time and roles. Like, I think this is where I may have gotten things wrong in the last 10 years. I thought if we just created teams where everyone felt like they belong, people cared about them, treated them with respect, that would be enough. And yet experience is showing in a lot of cases that's not enough for today's athletes. People want to feel they matter. Athletes want to be important to the team's success. There are plenty of groups for them to join. Heck, they could join an online gaming community and feel safe and feel like they belong. There are plenty of clubs out there for belonging. But in sports and with teams, I think there's this desire to feel like they matter, like they're contributing to the wins, the successes on the team. Now, I'll be honest with you. I don't have all the answers for this yet. But outside of giving them playing time, like, how do we engage our athletes in a way that helps them to feel they matter, that they are helping the team to be successful? This has got me thinking a lot. Now, in today's podcast, Nate, Betsy, and I, we're going to unpack one specific element of this, which is a common challenge in managing teams' roster. Okay, it's a common scenario. For instance, in American high school, you might have a varsity, JV, and freshman team. In club sports across the world, you got your first team, second team, third team. You might have your special elite academies. And even in pro teams, it's the farm team or the big leagues, right? Either way, the question for us as leaders is, how do we keep people engaged, not just feeling safe? How do we help people feel like they are mattering? Well, we're going to start to unpack that a little bit today. Welcome to the Coaching Culture Podcast. My name is JP Nerbun. I'm here with my co-hosts Betsy Butterick and Nate Sanderson. The mission of this podcast is to help you become a better leader and build a better team culture. To get the notes of this and every episode of the podcast, all you need to do is subscribe to the Team Culture Toolbox. There's a link in the details of this episode, or you can do so at tocculture.com. Also, check out Betsy's blog on Substack at Betsy Butterick. Now, let's get into today's conversation.
Well, JP and Betsy, we're going to talk this week about a topic that a lot of high school coaches face. This has actually come up a couple of different times on our online community and TOC Coach, that I think presents a lot of very complex challenges for coaches to navigate. And when we talk about this, there's a little bit of a twinge of playing time here. There's some communication challenges. There's dealing with some expectations. And the specific situation we want to really address here is, how do you go about thinking about and communicating through when you want to move players between levels in a program? And we're going to start in a fairly specific context at the high school level. It's where most of my experience has been. When you have players at the JV level, and just for the sake of the start of our conversation here, let's imagine a 3-tier program where you have a freshman level, a JV level, and a varsity level. And you've got some players at the JV level that are better players that might enhance your varsity practices. And so, everybody thinks about moving them up. But when you move them up, that can ruffle some feathers at the varsity level. Maybe some upperclassmen can feel threatened. Some other kids on the JV that aren't moving up, maybe they feel a little slighted because they didn't get the same opportunities. And then, of course, the minutes back and forth are something that are going to have to be negotiated. What's practice going to look like? It just becomes a very complex issue, one that I think can really serve your program in a positive way when you figure it out, but can also lead to a lot of pitfalls and sometimes some challenging conflicts when it comes to moving players back and forth between levels. So maybe we'll start just with this, kind of your overall impressions. You guys have worked with coaches, obviously, at lots of different levels. What are some of the challenges that you've seen when it comes to sort of this migration of players that are moving up or down or from one level to another?
Yeah, I think coaches are trying to internally figure out, how do I balance these kind of things that almost seem like they're competing against them. Development of the players, like what's best for a player's development for the individual player. Um, Obviously, if we have players in a program or a team for an extended period of time, we want them to develop so that we can be successful and perform down the road. And then you look at performance. Okay, how do we manage that as well, right? So we have performance. We want to win this week, this year, this season. So how do we put the best players in the situation there? How do we design practices that suit that? You know, are we getting our top team challenged and pushed from that standpoint? And then you're probably looking at culture, right? Is like, how do we do this in a way that players aren't defecting, becoming culturally toxic, feeling like they're being lied to, you know, feeling like they're being kind of yanked in multiple places, you know, and just dealing with the cultural challenge within this, right? Do you want to really build a really super connected top team, varsity team? Do you want to have the second team, your JV team, being more connected as well? So, I mean, I think you see this in other contexts too, even outside of high school sports, but there is that first team, there's the second team, there's the third team in a lot of different contexts. And from a cultural standpoint, it seems like some days it'd just be easier if we just had our group, our top team, and we could just focus all our efforts on them. So there's definitely a cultural component to this.
Yeah, and communication wise, and you mentioned it, Nate, so much of the language around shifting players between different levels, especially within a program, whether that's one high school program or it's within the story that's coming to mind is when I was living in Austin, Texas, I had an opportunity to go listen to one of the senior staff members from the San Antonio Spurs. And he was talking about how when they send guys to the D League team in Dallas, he said, we don't send guys down to Dallas. We send them to Dallas because the purpose of why we are sending them to Dallas is for them to get some intentional development, high reps, regain confidence so that they can come back and compete with the Spurs. And so oftentimes just the language that we use around, you know, you're getting moved up to varsity, you're getting moved down to JV. If we can start to be intentional, yes, about setting expectations and also about the language within a shared opportunity. So this is about development at every level, our freshman team, our JV team, our varsity team. And players may transition between different levels for the purpose of development. So you're going to get a different kind of development if you're on the JV team and you play with the varsity group. You're going to get a different kind of development if you're on the varsity group and then suddenly a member of the freshman group or the JV group comes up. That's also for your development as a varsity team member in a different way, even though you're not that person transitioning between levels. So I think setting the expectation in addition to shifting the language to focus on why are we doing this so that people have a shared understanding of not just this is adding or taking away from my individual experience, but what's the purpose that we share in the pursuit of the goals we have for the program.
Well, maybe one way we can kind of address this, because there are so many moving pieces and really so many different perspectives that you can look through, lenses that you can look through, because the JV player and their parents might look at the opportunity one way, and that might create resentment with the freshman parents, right, who aren't getting the same opportunities. And also, as JP mentioned, you know, there is this idea that we don't want to bring someone up to the varsity level that is going to potentially contaminate's not the right word, but maybe not meet the cultural standards for a varsity practice, which likely are different than a lower level practice. So maybe we start our conversation here in terms of just what are ways to prepare the soil either for your varsity team to bring someone into that practice or preparing a player that's going to be brought up a level. What are good strategies, whether it's communication or, you know, doing some of the pre-work here? And I'll give one example, and then you guys obviously can chime in here. But one of the things that we did at one of my stops was whenever we brought an underclassman up, I would meet with our captains with that player. And sometimes if that was a mid-season promotion, it would be a bit of a surprise. Like we would meet with her as though it was on our one-on-one schedule, and we'd give her a box. We did this a couple different times that had the varsity uniform in it. And it was a really cool moment for her because she didn't expect it. And now here she's opening up this varsity uniform and getting moved up. So there was almost this little ritual celebration just with the team leaders and with her that was really cool. But then we also had the captains who typically have been through that experience before, right? Like they're typically better players that probably got brought up early, which in those cases they were. So we had them share some of their experience about what that was like. Because for the player coming up, like, yes, it's exciting, it's a great opportunity, but it's a new level, right? It's an established team, especially if it's, happen in the middle of the season. And so they can maybe feel a little intimidation. You've got a group that's already functioning together. Now you're adding a piece to it. And so, and if they're an underclassman, and upperclassman might feel threatened by that. Our captains just did a great job of sort of talking through their experience. And I remember one of them telling his freshman that she had a senior that took her under her wing when she was a sophomore and got brought up when nobody else wanted her there. That's what it felt like to her. This girl, Amanda, was there for her and talked to her before and after practice and make sure that she was welcome in her groupings and stuff like that. And she's like, that's the kind of senior I want to be for you guys. And it was just such a cool moment where we were really trying to coach the transition, both for the group to accept someone new and for the new player coming up to feel like she has earned it and that she can be comfortable operating kind of at this new level.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one there, how you're creating a ritual and tradition almost as like this kind of rite of passage. You've come to this level, and it's almost an honor, right? It's a big deal to get that varsity jersey. And I've seen that in a lot of different contexts in international competition to, and with rugby or, soccer, you get your caps, when you have that jersey, you get to dress out for the team. So I think it's, you see a lot of cool traditions in sports for people making it to the top team. I think there's another way to play it, which is to make less of a deal of it. I'm not saying there's a right or wrong, but if you look at like, I like to go back to the playing time way, and then we can compare it to this. But like in playing time, there's coaches on one end of the spectrum which are like, you earn that starting spot. It's very hard for you to lose that spot. Like you got to consistently play poorly for a long period of time, and it's like a big deal. And then you got the other side of the spectrum where coaches are chopping and changing their starting lineup all the time because it's like, hey, who practiced well, who played well, right? And that becomes the norm. I think kind of like sometimes the middle becomes really complicated and a little bit more, difficult for players, difficult for coaches. But I'm not saying one or the other is better, but I'd also just go and apply that to this situation here too, which is like, I mean, there's probably some context where coaches like, hey, today we need you on varsity. And the expectation is we're a team here and we need you to step up. We got players injured, we got people out sick, or hey, we see this as an opportunity for your development. Like this is a game where we're gonna probably get up by a lot, and we see you have an opportunity to get some minutes here, right? And whatever it could be, but there could be a context where it's just the expectation is like we're about the team here, and we're gonna move you in the positions that the team needs. You just gotta be ready. And so I think there's probably an argument for that. And I think that is, I guess my question back to you is just like, well, then how do we prepare the soil for that, right? How do we create an environment where players know the norm is that there is really no norm? It's just going to be constantly chopping and changing because our situation is so complex and so fluid.
I was just going to say, Betsy, that's where I defer to my communications expert and shoot a text message to Betsy.
Well, yeah, and I mean, my mind is swirling it, and transparently, both of you have more experience with this than I feel like I do, especially in recent years. And where my mind goes, Nate, when you're talking about the ritual and the ceremony, and JP, you're saying, and some people make less of a deal about it, right? Because you don't want it to be as disruptive, even though it is a big deal for this kid, but it might be something that feels threatening to this kid. And my curious question for communication goes to, okay, so let's say you've got that senior who now is welcoming a sophomore permanently into the varsity ranks. This senior rarely plays, or JP, to your point, hey, we need you on varsity today. And, we're probably going to be up by a lot. And this is a chance for you to get an opportunity to play. You've got that same senior who's like, oh, we're probably going to be up on a lot. This is my one game where I'm going to get some significant minutes. But now this player from JV is inserted into the game and they're taking, quote, my minutes, right? So what is the conversation, either culturally or individually, to that senior lower level skill, being asked to be flexible, to put the team first? And also, there's likely a little bit or a lot bit of resentment. What does that conversation sound like for both of you in your experience?
I'll jump in here on this. The thing that I love the most and it makes me excited to have this conversation is we do something around playing time. We call the playing time case studies. We get our team together and we hand them and put them in groups of like 3, 4, 5 people. And then each group has a case study, a situation around playing time. Player A is a starter, gets injured. Player B takes player A's spot. Player B plays really, really well, actually better than player A was going. Does player A get the starting spot back, right? Like real difficult, mind boggling questions that coaches face, right? Or, player A is a veteran, they're a senior player, they've been in the program longer, but player B is younger. Player A and player B are pretty much even on ability. Do you play and what they could do for performance at this point? Does player A get the start, the one that's been there longer, or does player B, who has longer and more room for development for the long term good of the program, right? And you give them the players these questions, and then you say, all right, you all as a group have to decide what should the coach do. And it just creates a conversation that actually gets players exposed to the complexity. You could do the exact same with some of these scenarios around, you know, sharing players, right? JV player might be able to help us. Do we move them up for a game? Like those types of, whatever the real scenarios that you face on a yearly basis, put them on a card, give them the players, let them have a discussion about it. And then it doesn't mean, well, that becomes the standard for your program. It just means that they understand and experience the complexity. So now you're able, because they've stepped in that space, now you're able to say, okay, well, this is how I approach it. These are my principles here. Not necessarily always gonna be right, but this is how I think about it. And this is how I'll make decisions. So they get to experience the complexity, and then you get to communicate your principles around that decision-making process.
Yeah, that's great, JP. And I think to build off of that last bit there, as a coach, I think we have a responsibility to think through a little bit, like, what is my purpose? What are my priorities, even before I'm starting to communicate with players or parents or administrators? And just to give you another example of kind of a continuum here, there are coaches, I would put myself on this end of the spectrum, that at the varsity level, we're playing to win. And we're in our case, last season, we were playing to try to win a state championship. So every decision that we made from there, we work backwards from what do we believe gives us the best opportunity to win the last game of the year. Now, not every year are you going to have that opportunity or that kind of team. But what's interesting is I'm having this conversation with another coach, and they point blank said, well, Nate, my purpose is to keep as many people out for the sport as possible so we can reach as many kids as we can. But that's a different way and a different mentality to think about playing time. If I'm going back to Betsy's example of the sophomore that might be better than the senior, if I think the sophomore is at, number 8 or number 9, and if someone gets hurt, they may have to play meaningful minutes in a meaningful game, and we're trying to win the last game of the year, then I'm probably giving that kid the nod for those developmental minutes. But if my purpose is to keep players out for as long as possible, and there's nothing wrong with either one of those perspectives, then I'm probably going to honor, the player that's put in the time, that's been out for 4 years, that is a good culture piece, because just to keep them, not to keep them happy, but like to honor their commitment to the program, because that's what we want. We want players that are going to stay out and be part of it for 4 years, and that's great too. So I think just a coach understanding that and being able to articulate it and then work it backwards, where somebody would think, oh, okay, I get it. If you want to keep people out, it makes sense that you're honoring players that have been out for a long time. That makes sense in how you might approach one of these case studies, versus if you're trying to win a state championship, I can see why you might substitute in a different way, because that's the purpose that we're striving for. So that's the work I think coaches have to do even before the communication piece comes in, is understanding how we're approaching and how we're thinking through our purpose and priorities.
I love how you call that out, Nate. I mean, I know I have the course, the playing time system course. It's really a role course, about 40 minutes that's we have in TOC Coach. And I laid out as 3 very clear processes. How do you decide playing time? You got to figure that out first. Then how do you communicate that, right? And then how do you support players within that? And that process, I think, is really important. There's an story in Sacred Hoops by Phil Jackson, not story, he just kind of a philosophy where he actually played, I think, a lot deeper into the bench than most NBA coaches. Very competitive, and yet he was able to integrate this idea of we're going to be competing for NBA championships and we're going to play deep in our bench because we want players to have that experience. We want to be, developing them, building into them. Now, he has an 82 game season, right? It's a bit different than maybe the condensed high school coach season or even a college, where the pressure's high, you lose a game here and you're out of it, right? So it's a bit different. Like every context is different. But I love that perspective of him because I think he really integrated both winning and also like the team culture aspect of things. I think when it comes to the support aspect, so you decide, communicate, and support, though, it's one thing I would mention here, which I think maybe we're getting wrong in sports and even in teams and organizational culture today, is we focus a lot on belonging. Like, hey, we want everyone, hey, you belong here. We feel connected. And we do a lot as coaches. And I know I've done a lot of work with coaches in the last decade on helping everyone to feel like they belong. And coaches are working there to show, hey, we care about you. You matter. But I was reading something from Gaping Void, a blog I follow there. They talked about how people aren't into belonging. They're into mattering more. They want to matter. Do I matter here? And I think playing time, roles, they want to know wherever they are. And every player looks at it differently. Some like, I want to matter. I want to matter on JV because I'll play minutes and I'll compete and I'll win. Some are like, no, I want to matter in the program on a big level here. We're a really successful program. I want to be on varsity. But then once they get there, they're like, well, actually, I want to play because I want to matter. I mean, I look back at my days in South Carolina. I was like a walk-on. I was like, oh man, if I could just make the team, if I could just make the team. And then I made the team. I was like, if I could just make the travel team, if I could just go up to Rupp Arena and be with Kentucky, and then I get to travel. And then I'm sitting there at Madison Square Garden going, gosh, if I could just make it on the court, if I could just make it on the court, if they could just put me in. And then I go play, 90 seconds. I'm like, geez, if I get to come back again next year, I really want to be a player. Like I want to contribute. I want to matter, right? So we constantly want to push the goalpost back. But I think, how do we help players feel like they matter, right? That's a big, big challenge for us in this equation.
Yeah, the same, JP. I've heard and great intention. Love belonging. Big fan of belonging and inclusion. And when we parse it out, that feeling like I matter. And I often think of this in alignment with, there's that quote that says, we're all just walking each other home, right? Like there's incredible power in bearing witness to the experience of others, in being seen, in feeling like what we are doing, who we are presenting ourselves as, the way that we're spending time and energy has an impact. It's contributing to something in some way, that we matter. And I'm thinking about, especially in college level sports this year specifically, a lot of programs are going through roster caps and travel rosters, some for the first time, right? And I'm thinking specifically UMass Field Hockey and Iowa Field Hockey, two of the programs that I support, they have travel rosters and limits for the first time. And so different conversations with both groups. And I remember being at UMass and talking with their leadership group, and they said, this is going to be really hard. We've never not taken everybody, and we have to leave, I think it's 3. They have to leave 3 behind. So how do we go on the road and leave 3 people that we love, that we have always taken? And so they were very intentional about how they want to honor those 3 who are not with them. Separate from just saying like, hey, we miss you, or including them, like they wear the numbers of the 3 people that are not there on their hand. They bring their jerseys and they put them on the bench on the sideline because they matter. They're like, we're not here on the road doing what we're doing if not for our entire team. So even though they're not allowed to travel with us, we want to make sure that they know that they matter. And so thinking about not just belonging, but how do you matter? Going back to that senior, sophomore, okay, you're not getting the playing time. And as a senior, your clock is running out for opportunities to feel like you matter. You've made a contribution to this team. So then the conversation becomes, okay, how can I as a coach highlight the contribution separate from playing time to ensure that before this senior leaves our program, they know that their time spent here, their relationship with teammates, what they brought to the program matters. And what does that look like? And how do I make that known? How do I highlight that? And is that an individual conversation? Is it a team conversation? in the very similar way that you said, first coaches have to decide, are we here to win and to compete, or are we here to make sure everyone gets an opportunity? Like, there's so many different decisions that have to be made and then communicated. And then, we're getting into, well, what really matters to us as a coach, but also to the players that are part of the program. And do we have alignment and shared understanding around those elements? It's very complex. And I don't know that I have a lot of answers, but I love where you both have taken the conversation.
Well, and one thing I'd add to that, Betsy and JP, I love that you bring this point up about meaning, right? What does the experience on the team or the varsity shirt or the starting status mean to the individual? And what's so crazy about this profession is that, I mean, I can think back to players that we have elevated from JV to varsity, or upperclassmen that have played on JV, or, however you're moving pieces back and forth. If you ask them that question, what's the most important thing to you about being on this team or a member of this team? You're going to get different answers. And so I think that was really new learning for me over the last few years, is that you may have a senior who loves basketball. We had a senior a few years ago that we asked to play some JV because our numbers were low. And normally that's not something that happens. And most of the time, upperclassmen sort of see that as a badge of shame. And this particular player was like, I love to play. I want to play. So that's great. I want to play. Whereas the year before, if you would have asked a senior or you give an upperclassman, sometimes we give those players the option of getting some more developmental minutes at the JV level if they want. Like, they have first dibs on it because that's where they're at in the program. And they say, no, I don't want to do that. I just want to be on varsity. Okay. And even if you're only getting a couple of minutes or you're not playing consistently, we think it would be good for your development to keep, getting some game time. And they don't want to, because the meaning assigned to being on the JV level to them makes it something that they don't have any interest in. And that's fine. Like, I think that's where having an understanding of the individual, and we've had seniors that have been out that are just happy to be with their friends, and they don't really have expectations at all about playing or getting in the rotation reps or what have you. And they're totally fine with that. And others that are really angry about that, because they feel like they've earned it. So I think that's where, understanding what's most important and having that conversation, particularly with those kids that are affected, then allows us to work backwards a little bit from there.
I think another important question in managing this complexity for coaches to be asking is, what game are we playing here? Like, in this institution, what are they about? There's so many clubs, programs, schools today that have gone like no cut policies, and that's okay. But when we're in a no cut, we're often saying, hey, we want people, everyone can belong. Everyone has a spot. Everyone has a team. Great. We want to get as many kids involved in sport as possible. We just have to be prepared for a few things. One is that it might affect our ability to be really competitive. I'm not saying you can't do it and be super competitive, but there's also a group of people within your community that are just going to become disgruntled when you do have heavy, big, large rosters, and they don't feel like the top players are getting the focus, the attention. We're not playing enough to win. Or you, like, on the other side, you get the players that are like, well, I'm here and I'm not playing. I don't matter, right? Like, it's like, well, we said you could belong, but we didn't say that you necessarily were going to play minutes that mattered to us winning the game. It doesn't mean that you don't matter to us, but like, at the end of the day, yeah, you could be gone and like, we're going to be just fine when it comes to our team's performance. And that's the truth, right? Like, you take a roster of 20 on a basketball team, or you take 100 kids on a football team. There's a lot of kids out there that may provide value to win games on Friday night. There's also kids that will help you get better in practice. And there's probably in a 100-man roster, a lot of kids out there that if they just were gone, like, I don't know if they bring anything. They actually potentially bring obstacles to a practice environment, right? There's a lot of bodies, right? And a lot of people we have to take care of here. It doesn't mean it's a bad thing. It's new challenges and obstacles. So cuts or no cuts is a big thing. I think, just back to the mattering thing too, I think today's generation, and we'll talk maybe a little bit about this more in our next episode with Betsy around Gen Z and Gen Alpha, but it seems to be that the signals of mattering come a lot from their peers, not just always their coaches. And I think that this is where leaders in the locker room are so important. I'm doing my research on my new book around the athlete leader, captains, player leadership groups. And I just see consistently these great some of the greatest leaders in sports, baseball, basketball, ice hockey, soccer, right? Wherever it is, they keep talking about how these leaders, these captains, were so inclusive from the beginning of everyone, right? Steph Curry's taking guys out to, they're the 12th man. He's taking them out to dinner. He's taking them for coffee. Kyle Schwarber, he's taking guys to buy their first suit. That's a rookie. That's on a tight budget. Just crazy stuff that these guys are doing within the locker room. So there's a point where in all this conversation, we have to say, where does my responsibility end? Like as a coach, I got a lot of things to manage here. I got to pick what's best. What game are we playing? Here's our path forward. I'm communicating. Yes, we're going to support and we're going to show care for all our players in this way, but we also are going to say our players have to do a job of that, which I love, which Betsy you shared about in the UMass situation, and then see at what point is it just the player's responsibility. At what point does the player have to step up and say, you know what, I don't like the role I want. I'm going to go work for something better. That's Tom Brady at Michigan. He was not in the starting lineup. He was the fifth string quarterback. And his psychologist said, toughen up, man. Just go work harder. You got to put your head down. You got to dig in here if you really want it. Stop complaining. So I think there's a bit of responsibility of ours as coaches that has to end somewhere. I'm not sure where, but that's something we need to think about.
Yeah, and I think about this often, JP, is that like the transferring of ownership and responsibility. So baseline shared responsibility, especially between coaches and athletes. And I know with the conversation we're focused on today at the high school level, that also very much involves the parents setting that expectation. Here's what we as a program are about. Here is what we as a team are in pursuit of. And this is how we determine those categories that you mentioned before, JP, regarding player selection, playing time, and support. I'm thinking, again, recently was with Maryland women's basketball at their team retreat, and they have anyone who's interested in a leadership position gives a speech on why they think they would be a great leader, and then they field questions from their teammates. And what was so impressive sitting in the room that night was over half the team put themselves forward as a leader, including a freshman who had just joined the program, and including a sophomore who knew she was not going to be selected as a leader, but simply wanted to have that space as a team to have a conversation about something that really matters to the success of the program this year. And so incredible amount of leadership potential in the room. And when the speech is finished, head coach Brenda Fries said, here's the thing, this team this year is incredibly special. And there is immense potential. The one thing I need to make known now is that in order for us to reach our potential, everyone in this room will see less minutes than last year. Whether last year you were with a different program or with our program, everyone in this program will see less minutes. Most of you will not have the numbers, the stats that you're used to having. And when you can get there, then there is no limit to how far we can go. So that leadership of, okay, your responsibility is to not just accept the role that you're given, but to embrace the fact that in this pursuit of a national championship, the team is always the most important thing. Whoever is on the court fighting for that victory to advance the program, that is always the most important thing. And what are the choices that you make in the moments, especially where you're not playing, that add value, that matter when we talk about, mattering? Because you're right, JP, like the mattering, the identity in response or respect to peers is often one of the highest priorities for kids these days. Well, I want to be a starter, not because I really care so much about starting, but because when people see me as a starter, then that it resonates in a certain way with my peers. Super complex, and also really important conversations to have at all levels.
Well, Betsy, I appreciate you sharing that, because I think it actually sheds a little bit of light on JP's question about where does the coach's responsibility begin and end, and where does the player's responsibility begin and end. And I think there's some overlap, obviously, in those areas. But what you're kind of articulating here is that it's the coach's responsibility to set the expectations, to articulate their philosophy, and really to be frank about, if we're going to try to reach our potential, then these are things that we're going to have to be able to encounter. These are the challenges that are going to be here for us in this room. As as Brenda, articulated there with minutes and stats and that sort of thing. I think bringing the reality forward is and trying to find a way through that, deal with that, is part of the coach's responsibility. My question for JP would be, can you give us an example or think of a place where, yeah, I agree, this is the coach's responsibility, but maybe here's where it ends. And I'll give you one example, perhaps, that at one of the districts I was at, if we brought an upperclassman up to the varsity level, the parents had to sign not really a contract, but sort of just this document that we would articulate, lay out, here's what practices will look like. Here's what their playing time might look like. They might have a chance to work their way into the varsity rotation, but maybe they're also playing some JV. Here are the expectations. And do you agree to support your daughter under these circumstances, essentially? And really, every parent's going to sign it, obviously, if their daughter has a opportunity to play varsity. But we were really trying to be very clear and ground expectations for both the player and the parents about what this promotion meant. And obviously, every role would be different with every kid that we brought up. Now, some might look at that and say, geez, Nate, do I have time to do that? If I want to bring up 5 underclassmen to start the season, I've got all these other things. They might say, I don't know if that's my responsibility. So can you give us any kind of guidance, JP, or just kind of when you're thinking about that question of how do I figure out what's my responsibility and maybe where the player has to take over and just be able to handle kind of reality?
Well, I know as a parent, I want to equip my kids with the skills to take responsibility for whatever situation they're handled. If they have a boss or they have a coach that does not communicate well in all of this. So my hope is, as a parent, is to prepare them for the worst coaches and the worst situations at times, right? Like the guy or the girl that just absolutely does not communicate at all, right? So I think I just want to put that in there. So I think our kids can always take lots of responsibility. From a coaching perspective, I would just go back to, are you doing each of those 3 things? Do you have a clear idea of how you decide roles, playing times, how you make these moves? Do you have some principles upon which to operate? Then can you communicate those to those players? Okay, you don't want to do the case studies activity, which is a really great culture day with your team. I get it. That's fine. You could just sit up in the front of a room and run through a slide presentation, but do that at least at the parent meeting. Go, this is how we decide who goes here, who goes where, right? The third thing is, how do we support players? What am I willing to do to support players in their role? Every coach listening to this, I know you care about every single player on your team. That's what a transformational coach does. The player that is at the end of your bench, they still have value as a person. And how are you going to show them that you value them as a person? How are you going to show that care? You may not even be able to commit that much time to the 100th player on your football roster if you're a head football coach. But there's some way that you can show, or you can empower your coaching staff to make sure they're providing support for that player in the bottom of a 100-person football roster. You can do that. So find ways to do those 3 things. And then I'd leave it with this. The challenging question, I think, is, how do I know when I've made the right decision? How will I know that the way that I have managed roles and playing time is the right way? Because no matter if you're at the NBA or you're at youth under 10s and you're making an A team and a B team, C team, right? You will have players and parents that will be disgruntled. It's just going to happen. Like literally NBA players get upset about these types of things. NFL players, right? Their role and the lack of communication from organizations, right? You're going to. And when that happens, does that mean that you did a poor job? Right? And so this is where I think the responsibility really starts to wear on coaches, is where we feel, well, they're unhappy, so I must not have done well. It's my responsibility for them to be happy. I think that is probably the biggest boundary we have to draw. It's like, hey, I've done my job. I'm going to learn. Maybe I could tweak it a bit. But at the end of the day, I have to go and continue to make decisions what I think is best for the team and live by my principles. And I'm good with that. I can still work to take their perspective and feel their pain and frustration, but I have to operate from a sense of principles, not from how people are feeling. And I think that's what the strong leadership takes.
Yeah, and JP, I appreciate the invitation for coaches to reflect on, how will we know, right? Like what is my determining factor, my metrics for success, if how I'm doing what I'm doing is working. I'll throw another question for reflection in there, and this is part of the dedication in my upcoming book, Kids These Days. It says, while it's not your responsibility, you have an incredible opportunity. And I think that gray area in coaching, the things that technically fall outside of our responsibilities as a coach working to increase growth and development relative to a sport. And yet, because of the opportunity we have as a coach in a sport environment, developing people, whatever falls into that space, if we want to talk about impact, what matters, what for you as a coach is not your responsibility. However, you have an incredible opportunity to impact an individual, their experience, your program, the outcomes that you achieve together. So for me, like, once we've defined all these things, and I know there's so many, but also thinking about what is outside of my responsibility that I don't have to do, but I have an incredible opportunity to do, and making that choice will matter, again, either to an individual or a team in a way that really makes an impact.
Well, JP and Betsy, I think at the end of the day, what we're really articulating here is that this is an incredibly complex situation, and it doesn't matter the age level. It doesn't matter whether you're talking about professional, college, or high school sports. Like, anytime we're moving players around, up, down, left, or right, it's complicated. And I think that, number one, that's okay. That's part of sport, and there really isn't a way around that. I think the other thing, as JP, you were talking there about this opportunity, is that if I look at a roster of 20 players or 50 players or 100 players, it feels overwhelming for that to be my sole responsibility. And I think of one of the many places that I failed in my career was that that's something that could be shared. Our captains can help offer care and support. Our assistants can offer care and support. Our systems can offer care and support. It doesn't just have to be my sole responsibility. And I think that's a perspective that can be valuable for coaches as well. That, yeah, there are opportunities here, and they're going to require a lot of forethought and a lot of communication, but you're not doing this thing alone. And that's why we've got TOC Coach. That's why you've got great coaches on your staff. That's why we do this podcast, because it's really about building a team to make your team work when the days get hard like this.
All right, that's it for today's conversation. I would encourage you to be sure to subscribe to the Team Culture Toolbox so you can get our weekly culture tools as well as the notes to this in every episode. This topic is a great example of the things that I love to explore, not just on this podcast, but I love to explore this with other coaches, these coaching dilemmas. And that's why one of the big reasons we have created TOC Coach, an online community and platform, training platform for coaches. So with TOC Coach, if you sign up, you're getting access to all our online courses. You're getting access to all our digital resources that are culture building tools, team culture day activities, right? Culture assessments. And then you're getting access to this incredible community of hundreds of transformational coaches. People are trying to do things the right way, to build culture. And that becomes the place that you go to on a daily basis to kind of feed your leadership, like to grow your leadership. So many of our coaches have said, this has replaced Twitter. This has replaced Instagram for me. This is where I want to go. This is where I want to spend time, because there's conversations around team culture. There's conversations around how we build relationships, hold our players accountable. There's conversations around leadership development and even just personal development. So it's such a rich conversation. We hope that you'll check it out today. You can get a 7-day free trial to join in there. Check out the courses, join the conversation. I guarantee you'll find a lot of value in there. Thanks again for listening today. Be sure to leave us a review. A nice 5-star review is always helpful. But most importantly, just share this episode with your coaches, the coaches in your community, in your school, in your club, as if you think they'll get a lot out of it.